I've been talking about large-scale monuments, and we've been talking about the need for artists to create things, that this is something that all beings do, actually, this need to make stuff. And we've been looking at that play out in the form of monuments. Um, but I want to now look at, of course, a painter, and I want to look at painting. I'm going to look at a guy named Vincent van Gogh, or Vincent van Gogh, depending on however you want to pronounce it. I'll use a pronunciation I used when I was growing up and taking art classes, but either is acceptable. Vincent van Gogh was a Dutch painter. He was born in the 1850s, and he had a very short life. He was only about 37 years old when he died. As many of you know, he was a very troubled individual. He was a guy who suffered from mental illnesses, from depression, and this also um, made him cause harm to himself. Uh, the very famous story that many of you are aware of is that Vincent van Gogh, and here he is, cut off his own ear. Um, and then eventually he took his own life. But Vincent van Gogh grew up the son of a minister. He was very religious as a youth. And although he wanted to pursue the same occupation as his father, initially he ended up going into the other family business. He worked as an art dealer with his brother Theo van Gogh. He was very, very close to Theo, and they had a very deep and loving relationship, these two brothers. And Theo often took care of his older but more mentally unstable brother, Vincent. And Vincent van Gogh, although initially he did well working alongside his brother in this corporate environment, Vincent van Gogh was not suited for this. As he got older, he was prone to violent outbursts. He was prone to deep moments of depression, and he did not hold on to this job long. So he decides that he wants to go into the other family business, which is something he actually always wanted to do, which was to be a minister. And Vincent van Gogh trained, he went to seminary. He was a very brilliant man. He spoke four languages. He was a great student, but once again, his temperament didn't allow him uh, to pursue this line of work and his devotion to God in the way that he wanted to. He frightened the members of his church with his outbursts and his depression. He was very, very misunderstood. Of course, this was also at a time where mental illness was deeply misunderstood. It wasn't even called mental illness. It wasn't, people who suffered from these kinds of illnesses weren't even treated as if they were sick. Many of the mentally ill were simply locked away and treated very poorly. Um, so Vincent van Gogh feels like a failure. He had failed at two occupations, two occupations that he really wanted to succeed in. And so he decides at the rather late age of 27 to become an artist. And he had always had a deep love of art. And he came from an art family, and he had always sketched, but he had never really studied formally painting. And so Vincent van Gogh more or less teaches himself. He ends up going to Paris at one point and meeting a bunch of different painters, and he's encouraged to pursue art even more deeply, which he does. Although, unfortunately, like many things in his life, Vincent van Gogh failed at that too, at least while he was living. Vincent van Gogh sold, depending on the historian you ask, only one or two paintings his entire career. And this greatly depressed Vincent. Eventually, he moves to the south of France. He moves to an area called Provence. He lived in several smaller villages down there, but he thought that the warm climate and the sunlight and the beautiful weather would help him out. And initially it did, but he soon fell back into his deep depressions, and his mental illness got the better of him. Vincent van Gogh um, spent the last months of his life in a mental health, or a sanitarium as it was called, in a mental health facility. Um, but the fascinating thing about Vincent van Gogh is that he, even though this was a man who got a very, very late start, he only worked the last 10 years of his life. He was 27 before he really painted seriously. These 10 years were extremely productive. He produced hundreds and hundreds of paintings. And really, the last few months of his life, the last year or so of his life, was even the most productive. And this was probably the period where he was suffering greatly, mostly from mental illness. Um, and he knew he was sick. Vincent van Gogh was uh, not blind to the fact that he had deep problems. And he had reached a point where, after very famously cutting off his own ear, after having an argument with another artist, uh, that he needed help. And this is when he books himself into the sanitarium. And there he was allowed to paint. And one night, Vincent van Gogh goes out, looks outside of his window, and paints this scene that he called Starry Night. At the time, he felt that this painting was a complete failure. But of course, now it's considered one of the great works of modern art, and one of maybe the great paintings, period. And here we can see in this painting Vincent van Gogh looking out over this small village in southern France. And you may ask yourself, well, why doesn't he just paint it like a photograph? What is he trying to show us? What does he want us to see? What is he trying to convey? And what do you think? I mean, he could have simply taken a picture if he just wanted to see what we see with our eyes. But he wants us to see what he's feeling. He wants to show us and convey to us the emotional impact of this starry night. And of course, this starry night is intense. The colors are bold. This gold is extremely gold. This blue is a deep, rich blue. The tree here almost looks like a flame. And he has painted it with this incredibly thick brushstroke that literally rises up, lifts up off the page. You could actually feel this texture with your fingers. It's almost like the entire night is alive. Everything is rippling as if you're looking at a pond and a stone has been thrown into it, and everything is moving. Vincent van Gogh still held on to his deep spirituality and his love of God, even after his failure at becoming a minister. And I've heard descriptions where this has been described as him seeing souls ascending, swirling, if you will, into heaven. But whatever we're actually seeing here, Vincent van Gogh is trying to paint more than what we simply see with our eyes. He's trying to paint his emotional and spiritual view of this starry night. And the really tragic thing about Vincent van Gogh is that it wasn't too long after his death that this man who sold a very small amount of paintings during his life, Vincent van Gogh started to become known. Part of this was because letters that he had written his family were published, and this brought attention to Vincent van Gogh. But poor Vincent spent the last day of his life in an incredible amount of pain. He died by shooting himself in the stomach, and unfortunately, he didn't die immediately, and he lived for about a day, and he died in the arms of his dear brother, Theo.